Pinky and the Brain, issue 22. A text box says that in the basement of Acme Labs, a sinister experiment is taking place. It also looks like 2 checkpoints are connected with electricity. Of course, it's Snowball, who sucks at naming inventions. Even being lazy about it would be better. He uses his device to look like Brain, but he sucks at it because he doesn't look exactly like him anyways. He has red eyes instead of pink. How could he be that incompetent when he was able to make this? Someone who looks at him would be more likely to assume it's still Brain, but he just has something wrong with his eyes for some reason. But it still caused someone to ask what happened to his eyes. He says Brain's been the foil to all of his plots. So he barely made any plots? That doesn't strike me as believable. He's constantly having the trope of strange minds think alike when it comes to Brain. So I thought he was trying a new plan every night because it's so similar to Brain, which means he's twice as incompetent as Brain is, if he's still failing every time without a Pinky as his partner to foil him. He says past attempts to discredit Brain didn't work. What do you know, he's already discredited? If he felt the need to try to discredit him, that proves that he thinks Brain's got a good reputation, because he has reputation to discredit. But why would he think that? Sure, he always fails at taking over the world, but it's not like at the end of the day he's just a harmless, awesome inventor with a lot to offer the world, because he causes trouble when he fails, and we usually don't see him doing any good. I thought we were supposed to assume that nobody knew who Brain was, so he wouldn't have a reputation. He wants to use Brain's plans as his own, so he's admitting that he knows Brain makes plans that are just as good as his. But it's still a bit surprising that he doesn't just think he should only use his plans because his plans would have to be better. He spies on Pinky and Brain from a distance, as I wonder why Brain never tried to use Snowball's plans. So he has more of an ego than Snowball, even though he has better intentions? Brain says he only wants to use a 12-volt battery, not 12 pounds of dynamite. And somehow Pinky keeps getting those confused. Just because there's 12 for both of them, even though the context would make it obvious what you need to use. Brain tells Pinky that when he gives the signal, he wants him to put the truck in reverse, causing the building of Town Hall to shake. And Pinky asks why they're doing this again. The paper is drawn as if Brain forgot that Pinky would be too small to drive a truck. He'd need some rope and levers to operate it. Pinky compliments his plan, and Brain says he's gonna take over the world by convincing people one town at a time that he can accurately predict earthquakes, while actually causing them. He thinks that just because he proves he can predict earthquakes, everyone would be looking to him for guidance to make him the world's ruler. Chuck from Archie Sonic could predict earthquakes. And sure, he got elected to council, but people didn't want to make him the world's ruler, though it's not like there was an election for world's ruler. They still wanted to elect him to something, so I guess Brain has a point. But it was never stated that people found out that Chuck predicted an earthquake. It'd be self-aware of the writing if Snowball thought this plan was really stupid, which I've been anticipating the whole time. Brain says people's houses will get rocked by hidden devices, and Pinky asks for ice cream. And when the doorbell rings, he hopes it's the bakery with their cake and ice cream. It would smart on to order some to have some fun. Brain lampshades that he ought to have his head examined for his choice in sidekick, even though he shouldn't exactly blame him for wanting to eat cake and ice cream. Snowball jumps him and traps Brain's head in a helmet where nobody would be able to hear or recognize him while he takes over his life. So I guess he ought to get his head examined too, because he saw what kind of assistant Pinky was, and still thinks he should take over his life. And Pinky would just assume Brain's eyes turned fully red for some reason. That wouldn't necessarily prove he's not Brain anymore, but you'd think he'd still question that immediately. And he'd be stuck if he couldn't tell him the answer. Pinky shows up and says there wasn't anyone there, and Snowball's smart enough to lie right away that Brain is his cousin Clement and is hiding his head because of a skin condition. And then you'd think he'd say, "And you have an eye condition?" And then he would say yes. But instead, he's too polite to question why he has red eyes when you'd think he'd really want to know. I have to assume for the sake of the story making sense that him making himself look like Brain results in him having Brain's voice. Otherwise, Pinky would be very confused that he sounds like Snowball. and figure things out because there's someone resembling Brain right next to someone who looks like Brain but isn't enough like him. And somehow, Pinky can't help but mention the Iron Mask and skin condition anyways. I like that Pinky points out that Snowball didn't ask him if he's pondering what he is, and Snowball asks Pinky what he's thinking. But why would he expect him to ask that question if he already told him his plan? He must have forgot because he's always in his own little world. He gets relatably annoyed by Pinky, but then traps Brain in the cage and has the clever idea to tell Pinky to play a game, where he'll repeat his plan back to him. It's smart of him to do that because he won't remember someone else's plan as well. Brain takes the dumb risk of throwing a screwdriver at the ceiling of his cage when that caused it to bounce all over the place. His head is pretty big, so if he crouched and hid his tail underneath it so that it was in a circle and kept his hands below his head, then he'd guarantee that it hit the helmet. But that still hurt him from the impact of a fast screwdriver. Running away would just leave the non-helmet part of him vulnerable. He angrily smacks his head into the bar of the cage near the keyhole. That alone opens the door. It wouldn't be confusing if it broke the bar and that was how he escaped. Pinky says they need a reason to get all the people together in one place first. So he comes up with a plan to call for a vaudeville show. And Snowball doubts that was Brain's plan. He saw all of his plan being spelled out to him. But Pinky has a good point. How else are they supposed to convince people to go to them? They're not an authority, so how could they hold a town hall meeting? Pinky says they'll fire up the outdoor lights with dynamite. 12 pounds of dynamite? Are you insane? That made me giggle. Thankfully, Pinky's surprisingly smart by remembering that he means batteries, when I thought they'd actually go on to use dynamite. They make people happy putting on a performance. Pinky says they have to ask everyone to assemble in the town hall in 1 hour where he'll make an earthquake prediction and end the meeting. The audience would hear that. Brain's head is stuck trying to get out of the cage. But that helmet isn't much bigger than his head. So how does he ever escape the cage? He somehow ends up being flung high in the air, and his helmet breaks the window, and he flies towards a hippie's vehicle. Pinky says their plan involves a truck, the town hall, and gelatin dessert. Snowball's a genius, not an idiot, so I'd never expect him to forget all of Brain's plan and have that drive the plot. This would make more sense if Pinky was doing the plan alone, but I still love it because it's more interesting that they do something else that's crazy and silly. Pinky tells Brain to get a truckload of gelatin and make a replica of the town hall that he'll shake when they cue him. Meanwhile, he remembers he's supposed to install a hydraulic jack in every basement in town. He remembers the name of the jacks and how to install them, but not the plan. Would it take forever to make a gelatin replica of the town hall? I guess they use nanomachines to do it. They're all working in unison, and they all know by wireless transmission what the other nanomachines are doing. I feel like the screw-up of Snowball would be more believable if it was Brain himself after something happens to him to make him forgetful. But then we wouldn't have the interesting subplot of Brain trying to get back to Pinky. Someone asks the driver of the hippie van where he got that cool antenna ball, which is actually Brain, and he says it must have been at the drive-thru. An hour later, Pinky says they accomplished the mission and compliments Snowball, who calls him out on eating the gelatin because he might ruin the integrity of the walls, only if he eats too much. And I don't think it'd be possible for him to eat enough of it to make the whole thing fall down, because he's so small and only has so much of an appetite. Pinky apologizes, and Snowball tells people he can predict earthquakes. Somehow they don't believe him, even though they're already talking to a talking mouse, and they chose to accept that as reality, and you'd think they'd all recognize him, so they'd know he's a genius inventor. Pinky pushes the wall and makes people think there's an earthquake going on, even though the floor itself wouldn't be moving, unless it was made of gelatin too. Pinky says the hydraulic jacks are powered by dynamite, and he blows up buildings. Snowball calls him an idiot for it, even though this wouldn't prove to people that he can't predict earthquakes. This is out of character for Pinky. After all the times he showed compassion, and he didn't want Brain's curses to be too dangerous, he didn't want to use violence in a karate match. Brain gets flung off the vehicle because of the explosion, and he bounces off the gelatin structure. Meanwhile, people run after Pinky and Snowball angrily for blowing up their town. They sure caused a lot of trouble. It only makes sense if Pinky made this mistake happily if he was a different universe Pinky. You'd think he'd feel horribly guilty about this. For once, people don't act like they're deaf to what Pinky and Brain are saying to each other about the plan in private. I was so used to that I didn't expect them to know Pinky was responsible for that. Snowball reveals that he can turn back to normal whenever he wants. That's pretty competent. He tells the crowd which direction to look to find Brain, who takes off the helmets because the gelatin was slick enough for him to squeeze out. Pinky's nice enough to be worried that he might catch something from wearing the helmet. People attack them, but then they just walk away. There's no reason they'd leave them alive after they destroyed a town. They're still talking, so they knew they were alive. Pinky tries to eat a grape and it destroys the gelatin replica. Not that it actually matters because the story ends there, with Snowball having a band-aid that came out of nowhere. You'd think the story would end after we'd get to see Snowball get beaten up first. Now I have to assume any story after this where humans let Brain and Pinky do what they want takes place in another universe. People are gonna see Pinky as the guy who destroyed a town, because there's tons of witnesses who would vouch for that. So they'd get famous for that, and this isn't gonna leave them alone. Unless Brain uses mass brainwashing, which he's capable of doing in the show, to make people forget about this. The next story has Brain in the 20s, where people must be intentionally ignoring him as he's trying to get their attention with a petition on supporting him. Pinky's got no trouble getting attention because women think he's cute and donate to him. Brain wrongly says that people are oblivious to anything important, and they see someone announce a publicity stunt to get people's attention with someone walking on a tightrope between city buildings, which is supposed to advertise songs, even though people would be more likely to remember the trick than what was advertised. Brain gets an idea to organize stunts of his own to become renowned as the greatest stuntman, and then it gets to take advantage of his fame in a different way later. That'd be really painful for him, so he'd want to quit pretty quickly, and he should anticipate that. At least he'd take advantage of the fact that he can survive tons of slapstick. Pinky comes up with silly ideas for stunts, but when Brain calls him out on it, he gets uncharacteristically offended and says he can do his stunting alone. Which I thought was going to be the case anyways, because Brain was talking as if only he would do the stunts. That he would be renowned as the greatest stuntman. That doesn't include Pinky. Brain shows a soft side by apologizing to Pinky. This makes these moments all worth it to me. Pinky takes a risk by actually standing up to him, and Brain actually softens up from it for once instead of hitting him. He decides to add some of his stunts to his list of stunts. To be fair, if his goal is just to get attention, doing especially silly stunts would get him that. But it wouldn't get him respect if the stunt's too silly. I don't really feel like what Brain's doing in front of the crowd below him matters. Either way, he's just doing a stunt every time. It'd have to get creative to impress me. Of course nobody cares because he's doing stuff that's uncreative, like a circus act. So it makes sense now that he needs Pinky's stunts for attention because they're so silly. So they cover themselves over in chocolate and wrestle above people on top of an air balloon. But why would they think that's exciting and entertaining if they can't even see what they're doing? Sadly, they lose their balance because there's too little room on the top of it, and they fall. So they don't even get to wrestle. I was about to compliment the story on letting Pinky wrestle Brain after all the abuse he got. They could have easily made the balloon bigger, couldn't they? People are impressed, and the circus owner gives Brain a contract to sign. Book him for fairs. He says soon there'll be household names. The only reason it's believable that they aren't already is that this is the 20s, where they usually aren't. So they didn't do anything they're known for in this time period yet. They're told to have every act end with Pinky falling on Brain's nose, and Pinky cheers about it instead of pitying Brain. That only makes sense if he's got some resentment for him. It seems to not like him, but it's realistic, considering how badly he treats Pinky sometimes. It makes sense that Pinky would like coming up with stunts to humiliate him. So after Brain falls on dynamite and launches Pinky into the air, we see Brain get hurt the same way over and over. Wouldn't it be more interesting to see what happened before that point? It shows how stubborn Brain is to not give up on a plan he started, that he's still doing this. He gets shocked and tells Pinky to take off the socks that were referenced before. Pinky says his next stunt is to have 10 million men across the country join hands. Why does the stunt involve all of those men? All they're doing is holding hands. That's not a stunt. If there's a bribe involved for all of them, that's supposed to be believable that they do this. It's easy for them to do, so it's easy for them to be told to do. But that could have easily not been a part of the stunt. It's just there to show that Pinky wants peace and for everyone in the world to get along. Brain wants to waste time making a note advertising him as the world's leader, when he should know that wouldn't get him anywhere. The stunt gets done, Brain ends up holding someone's hand when that seems too easy, and Pinky runs over to Brain holding the note that could have easily not existed. He's wearing the socks that build static electricity, which makes no sense because Brain told him to stop wearing them after they shocked him. So everyone in that line gets shocked, and it's reported on in the newspaper, but for absolutely no reason. It's reported on as them all being struck by lightning somehow. Why is Pinky smiling about the fact that they've got 10 million people out to get them? Why don't these people recognize them if they caused that? I guess the reason why the trouble they caused in the past doesn't cause people in the present to hate them is that they're not just in a past time period, they also went to another universe. The first story by Jesse McCann is about Snowball replacing Brain using a shapeshifter device and an iron mask over Brain's head, and a lie that he's his visiting cousin. What's entertaining is that he forgets Brain's plan and relies on Pinky to remind him of it, when he's supposed to be as smart as Brain, so you think he'd remember it even if it isn't his plan, and Pinky doesn't have the memory for it because he keeps being distracted by his own thoughts. So there's a creative twist where they do a vaudeville show to get people's attention, and the meeting with them gets held in a gelatin replica of the town hall instead of the real one. That takes forever to make because it's so big. Eventually, Pinky somehow confuses batteries and dynamite and blows up a town. That's overly dark, even if we don't see anyone get hurt. I guess the reason he doesn't angst about it is that he assumes everyone survived because he thinks everyone in town is at the meeting. Even though kids have school, adults have work to go to, and there weren't babies in the audience. So Snowball's plan to frame Brain for something awful works. But the story ends there without him getting to clear his name or even beat him up. This has to be in a different universe because people would recognize them for this from now on. There's just no way Pinky would make this mistake because, well, I guess I could believe that he'd get 12 one thing and 12 another thing confused. There's no way he would actually use dynamites to blow up a town because he's not evil. The second story by Jesse is about Brain and Pinky getting the idea to put on stunts for attention because Brain wants attention called to his genius and his useful modern household appliances, but isn't getting any for that. Because people haven't used them yet, so they don't know how useful they would be, and maybe he's overcharging for them. They never get to the point where he tries to advertise what he actually wants to be known for, which is a shame because I'd rather see him get useful to people. It's just a bunch of slapstick against Brain, usually the same kind over and over, which is of course repetitive. And most of the stunts aren't interesting to see, it's typical circus stuff, so it's a good thing Pinky's silly stunts happen, because he got uncharacteristically mad at Brain for insulting them. The most memorable stunt had them covered in chocolate on a balloon, but they weren't visible to the audience that way, so how are they entertained? They didn't even get to wrestle with each other before falling off. Eventually things go from bad to worse because Pinky had 10 million men hold hands for his stunts because he likes peace. And he made contact with Brain while holding a note that he shouldn't have wasted time with. And he was wearing socks that shocked all of them with static electricity. This had no excuse for happening because he got shocked by them before and was told to take them off. Pinky could have so easily not had the part about millions of men holding hands as a part of their stunt. Because it's not like it's a death-defying thing or a really silly looking thing. But with his poor reaction to Brain insulting his other stunts, it's justified that Brain wanted to avoid that by lying that he loved it.